Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday's workshop for the Autonomous Apes AI Trading Hackathon. So today's workshop is going to be from Mastra by Shane, and they're going to tell you about how to build an agent with their technology. But before I invite Shane up to the stage, I've got a bit of a surprise. And I am going to invite Derek up to the stage, who spoke to you at the launch of this hackathon, so he can say a few words to you. So Derek is just getting ready to come up on stage. Oh, hey, Derek.
Hi, Blake. Thanks for letting me nudge in here.
I can't hear you at all.
Okay, let me.
I've got you now. Great.
Okay, great. Just making sure. Yeah, I just wanted to say a few words to introduce Shane and Mastra. So, hi everyone. I hope the hacking's going well. As always, you can find us in Discord if you have any questions. I really like Mastra. I reached out to Shane to invite him to come give this workshop specifically because nobody has to use Mastra, but I strongly encourage you to consider it and look into it if you're looking for a starting place. I have already started using Mastra for several of my like behind the scenes DevRel things, helping me just do my work and my job in an easier way. Some of which I've been kind of hinting at on Twitter. So yeah, I'm just really excited for this workshop and really grateful to Shane for joining us. So highly encourage everyone check out Mastra, and there's also a guide in our docs for how to combine Mastra and Recall if you want to look more into that. So that's all I've got to say. I'll let Shane introduce yourself and some of your credentials better than I could.
Thanks, Derek. Shane should be coming up to present any moment now.
Great. While we're waiting, yeah, feel free to drop your GMs in the chat and say hi, everyone. Hey, Shane.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Sounding great.
All right, cool. It's great to be here. And thanks, Derek, for the introduction as well. And for
I'll leave you to it and get out of your way here, just so you're not disoriented. But thanks again for coming.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name's Shane. I will be sharing. I'll probably show a few slides. We'll try to keep that kind of short, and then I'll share some code, and we'll talk about how you can build an agent with Mastra and why it might make sense, depending on what you're trying to build, to use Mastra. So give me a second to figure out how to share here. And maybe get, forever infinite windows here. All right, so I think hopefully you all can see this. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what Mastra is, and then we're going to spend some time actually looking at how you might build and debug an agent or agentic workflows using Mastra. So yeah, what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk a little bit about AI agents, what's MCP, because you can actually use MCP to do this. And then rather than a personal assistant agent, I should change that to like a trading agent. We're going to talk about how you can give it some tools to actually facilitate it making trades. So who am I? I'm one of the founders of Mastra. I lead product over here. I've been in engineering and product at a couple different companies. I've been doing a lot of stuff in open source really over the last probably 15 plus years. So first started building websites in Drupal 15 plus years ago. So to date myself a little bit. But yeah, feel free to connect with me on X or Twitter, whatever we call it these days. So what is Mastra? Mastra is an open source AI agent framework for TypeScript. It has agents that you can provide tools, memory, and tracing. There's workflows with human in the loop. So you can, ask for your workflow can kind of suspend. You can ask for feedback. You can resume it. And it has a pretty simple API to make it easy to kind of build out complex workflows. We have evals, we have storage for RAG pipelines, and it's all kind of bundled into a local development playground, which makes debugging pretty easy. So our whole goal with Mastra is to be opinionated but flexible, meaning you can kind of get further faster, but you don't feel like you're locked into all the decisions that the framework made for you. So it should let you kind of get started really quickly, but then when you need it to, it'll get out of your way. So agents, I don't need to spend too much time on this. If you're already in this, workshop, you probably know, you have idea of what agents are. We like to say agents are kind of software with non-deterministic code. There's kind of an agentic spectrum. Like less agentic is, deterministic workflows with maybe a few calls to an LLM. More agentic is you can let the LLM build and execute their own plans, which is kind of where a lot of, I think, the trading agents fall into that category. And then you have like fully autonomous systems that completely run with very little human input. And then what is MCP? It's an open standard that connects LLMs to different systems. It's kind of like a USB-C port for AI applications. So you can kind of plug into different APIs to different tools. So you can kind of provide these tools to agents or agentic systems really easily. And you can start with, or kind of the diagram on the right kind of starts to highlight how this all works. You have a client, the protocol sits between it, and then you connect to the MCP server. And that MCP server could have connections to different APIs. And so we'll talk a little bit about this. Recall does have an MCP server. We won't probably use it too much because I want to show how you can build the tools yourself if you want to, but I'll show you how you can if you wanted to. So it makes it really easy to kind of add new tools to your agent. Just as some examples, we have a Mastra MCP doc server. So the nice thing about this, and I'll show it in our examples today, is that you can then connect this MCP doc server to whether you're using Cursor or Claude Code, and it allows your coding agent to have really good knowledge of what Mastra is, so up-to-date knowledge of our docs. That way, oftentimes we're using coding agents to build our agents, right? And so this makes that a lot easier. So you can kind of give it to Claude Code, you can give it to Cursor, or any editor that you use that has MCP support, and it now has access to all of our docs. So you can tell it you want to build an agent that does something, and it'll go out, read the docs, and hopefully do a much better job. We also, just as another example of MCP, we built a Mastra 101 course that is an actual MCP server. So rather than watching a bunch of videos of me or someone else on the team, you just plug this MCP server into your editor, and your coding agent becomes your instructor of the course. It basically walks you through how to build an agent, talks about Mastra, how to add tools, how to build workflows. It'll essentially walk you through step by step, and then even write the code for you if you ask it to, and it'll track your progress along the way on the Mastra website. So kind of a cool use of MCP. There's a whole bunch of MCP registries. I'll just probably show you one in our example today that if you want to dig into it. The nice thing about these different MCP registries is that you can get a lot of tools that you might want, whether it's like research tools, whether it's like tools to get to different APIs that might give you information, but you can kind of plug it in pretty quickly. And if you are curious, we have about what registries are available. We have on our website the MCP registry, which is kind of started as a joke, but there are so many different MCP registries becoming available that if you need to search for different ones, you can do that. All right, so that was a quick just few slides. Now we actually want to get into what we're going to do today. So we're going to create a new Mastra agent. We're going to examine the agent and workflow code that kind of comes out of the box with Mastra so we can see how Mastra works. And then we're going to give that agent some access to some tools. We're going to talk about how we can actually give it some MCP tools as well. And then we'll have time at the end, of course, for some questions. So with that, why don't we actually start building? And I'm going to see, it looks like I can see the chat as well. All right, cool. Yeah, and this is interactive, so feel free to ask questions along the way. I'll try to stop and answer them as I can. So if we are running into something where you want some feedback, or you want to ask a question, just please ask away. All right, so we're gonna just start with the absolute getting started. So we're gonna go to the Mastra website. I'm just gonna copy this. This is kind of the best way to get started. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. Hopefully you can all see that. Okay, hopefully that's good. So let's see. So I'm just going to paste this in. npm create Mastra at latest. So Mastra, the one thing that's nice about Mastra is it is a code first tool. So you have access to all the logic that makes your agent or your workflow run. But we do provide, the MCP doc server and a number of other things, which makes it easy and kind of approachable if you're just getting started. All right, so we're going to call this, I'm just going to give it, we're not going to use this too much. I'll open up a different one that I already kind of pre-built, but just show you what it comes with out of the box. So just give it a name. It's going to install Mastra. This will take a minute because it's actually going out and downloading all the dependencies. And then it's going to ask us, what model we want to use. So we could use, OpenAI or Claude or Gemini or really any model. You could run models locally with, LM Studio and use those models for your agent if you wanted to, if you just wanted this to be a locally running agent. So you have a lot of different options around what you want to be the brains of your agent, so to speak. So we're going to just use the default source folder. I'll select OpenAI, but you could pick, anyone. And there's a lot more that are not supported here that if you go on our docs, we're built on top of Vercel's AI SDK. So any model that they support, you can use. I will just copy in my API key. And this is where it asks if you want to install the Mastra docs MCP server. So I'll install it into Cursor, but if using something else, you can select these options, or you can manually install it to any other editor that does support MCP. All right, so if we go into this folder, I'm going to open it up in Cursor. Hopefully it opens up. Oh, my free trial is ended. I didn't know I was on a trial. I'm pretty sure I pay for that. Must need to log in. So luckily we shouldn't need it. All right, so you can see it's kind of small, but you can see that new MCP server detected, Mastra, so I'm going to enable that. Now when I would ask Cursor questions, it can use the Mastra docs MCP. You usually have to tell it that you want it to, you have to use the word Mastra so it knows to use that tool. But if you ask about Mastra workflows, for instance, it should look up the docs from that MCP and use the updated docs when answering the question or writing code for you. All right, so I am going to go ahead and copy in just an environment file, just so I have it. And now I can run npm run dev, and this is going to run the Mastra development playground. And the nice thing about this is it does give you the ability to kind of test what you're building as you're going through it. So let me grab this and we'll just go here. And let's make this a little bigger as well. All right, so you see we have this weather agent and there's also this weather workflow. Let's just test this. You can see it uses GPT-4o Mini because I said I wanted to use OpenAI. And there's a lot of information on the screen, but it's pretty similar to any other chat interface. If we're going to chat with our agent, we can have our conversation history. I can actually send it a message. It tells me this is the system prompt of this agent. It tells me what tools it has access to. I could click on the tool and just test the tool in isolation if I wanted to. So I could click on that and test the tool. There's different model settings if you want to test different things. And it's all available through an API. So you can kind of connect it to different front ends. But for our purposes, we just want to test that this agent does something. So what is the weather in Sioux Falls, which is where I'm at? I don't know where you're all calling in from. But you can see it called the weather tool. And I can click and see what the results were. That looks right to me. It's about how it looks outside. Boise, all right, Idaho. All right, so and then basically it just summarizes it, right? So it just called the tool, very simple, didn't do too much. Let's look at the code that actually made that work. So if we go back to Cursor, in our source folder, we have an agents, a tools, and a workflows folder. And you can kind of understand where, what is probably in each of these, right? We have our weather tool, we have our weather agent. So if we go to our weather agent, We create a new agent. It gives it this system prompt that we could see, tells it what model to use. It passes in the tool, and we'll look at what that does. And then it has memory, so that basically allows it to store a running list of, if I ask it a question and then I ask it another question about my previous question, it knows the history of that conversation. If I go to the weather tool itself, there's basically this ability where it creates a tool. It gives it an ID, a description, and the tool descriptions are very important because that's the information that is passed into the agent, so it knows when it should call the tool. So this is a pretty simple description because it's a simple tool, but if you are handing off a lot of tools to your agent, make sure you spend some time on having very verbose descriptions. And then there's the input schema. That's like what needs to be passed into the tool and what you expect to get out. So when you saw when I expanded that out, you can see this was the input, the location, and here was the output. So you know what the tool's coming in, or what it's receiving, and what it's of course producing at the end. And you just calls this get weather function. This get weather function makes two different API calls. This first one just geocodes the city name, to get the location, and then it takes that latitude and longitude and fetches the weather for that location, and then returns the data that it gets back from that weather API. So all we did here is we just built a small amount of code that interacts with an API, right? But the interesting thing is this allows our agent to now use those tools to go out to remote APIs and then potentially make decisions on what it wants to do. The next thing we're going to look at is workflows. And the reason workflows could be interesting is that you may want, if you're building an agent where you want it to make decisions for you, you may want it to run at specific times. Maybe it runs every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes, every minute, I don't know, however frequently you want it to run. And maybe it goes out and it does some analysis, and you want to kind of control the steps that it takes a little more clearly. One option is to just put it in the system prompt of your agent, but you don't necessarily have as much control of what the agent decides. So that's probably where most people start, is just like adding a bunch of information to the system prompt and then just calling out to the agent and saying, go out and run this workflow, call these tools, do whatever. But if you have a more defined path that you want your flow to take, you could build a workflow, which is just like multiple steps, and you can have branching, which we'll show in a little bit. But in this case, we're saying go out and fetch the weather, then call an agent, call the weather agent to plan activities. So that's what we're going to do. I can run this for, let's try a different city, San Francisco. You can see it fetches the weather. Now it's planning the activities, and this is calling out to an agent, so it's going to take some time. And while this is running, so there's a question: if you're running multiple agents on the same machine, is there a way to let them share MCP resources more cleanly? That is interesting. So you're saying basically you're sharing, I guess, are you using, Andrew, are you using Mastra for that, or were you using a different tool? Because yes, there is, if you're running a single MCP server, then it is possible that it could try to use that same connection, but it should be, you should be able to make it work without, it should work. So I'm curious, we might need some more information on what was going on there, but you should be able to import the MCP client, connect to it, and share tools between different agents. I would say maybe you would want to try making multiple connections, so each agent makes a different connection to the server. But let me know how you were trying to go about it, and happy to chat more. All right, so this ran. We can see the output of this. It's kind of not well formatted, but maybe I can see it over here. Maybe it'll show a little better. Not really, but it's a one long string of what the plan would be. It might actually show it in the CLI. Yeah, so it shows in the CLI as well, but it made a plan based on the weather, right? It checked the weather. Here's the weather summary. Here's what you could do in the morning and afternoon. So it's pretty simple, but we can take a look at what it's actually doing here. So in this workflow, a workflow is a collection of steps, and then you connect those steps in a workflow. So you saw in this case, there's a very simple 2-step workflow. I'm going to go down to the bottom because that's usually the easiest way to start, because we actually create and export this workflow. And this workflow takes an input schema, which is just the city. The output schema is the string of activities to do. And it just says, first step is fetch weather, then plan activities. And we can look at what these steps actually do. It's just like calling functions. The first step is fetch weather. It does the same fetch weather tool steps, go out to those 2 APIs, and get the data, pass it back. And then plan activities makes a call to the weather agent and passes in the weather to the agent and says, make a plan in this specific format. So overall, it's not too complex. But the one nice thing about using workflows is you get this concept of traces. So I can see that, what ran, what was, what tools were run at what times. So it kind of got the tools, it got the different workflow tools. And then I can actually see the stream. So you can kind of see where it ran each step and then what happened within each step. So it's a little easier to debug and kind of go about understanding what decisions the workflow is making. So yeah, you got a lot of data. Yeah, and the agents all have traces as well. So you can see that was the previous request I made to the agent, where it was what is the weather in Sioux Falls, and you can see the results. So you can kind of dig in. You get a whole bunch of data about what's happening in any specific request. All right. So that's the high level. We went, and again, tools are just any tools that you assign to agents. So we get weather. So this is kind of the simplest version of what you can do. But let's actually look at something that's a little bit more complex. So I have another agent here, and I think I already have it open. No, I don't. Let's open it. So Carson, if you click on a specific call, do you get information on params? You should be able to in the traces, yes. And we are improving our tracing to add even more information. But you should be able to see what tool is called here. Well, I guess the agent, in this case, the agent didn't call the tool, right? We called it separately. So let's go to the agent itself and look at that trace where it decided what tool to actually call. So here you can see this was the AI tool call, the weather tool. Here's the location, here's the output, and then it bubbled up to the stream text where you can see the messages that got passed in. Here's the system prompt, here was my prompt, and then here was the response text. So yes, you can see if your agent does decide to call tools, you can kind of dig into the different tools and see basically what decisions it made. All right, so if we look at this other example I have here, let's run the dev server here. Let's stop this one and do npm run dev. So the playground is running. Let's go ahead and just go back to playground. All right, so now we have some other agents. So I have a bunch of different like travel and planning ones because I want to show you some more complex examples. And then we'll talk about what this trading agent is and where we could maybe take it from there. So I didn't spend too much time on building it because I think ultimately that you may all have opinions on what you want it to do. Probably much more educated on it than I am. So you can definitely hopefully learn from some of these examples and then implement it in a way that makes the most sense for where you think the alpha is. But so we have 3 different workflows. We have a couple different agents. So the weather agent is just the one we already seen, so we don't need to review that. But there's this weather branch workflow, which is a little bit more complex. So we're fetching the weather, and it's saying if the precipitation chance is greater than 50, then it should do indoor activities. Otherwise, if the precipitation chance is less than or equal to 50, plan for some outdoor stuff. And then it kind of maps the result or combines the result together. So it's not raining in Sioux Falls today. If anyone has a location where it's going to rain, let me know if you have a city that you know it's going to rain in. But I'll run this so you can see it's not going to rain today. So it followed that path. All right. So I don't know. All right. So this worked. You can see it. It fetched the weather. It planned the activities. I'm not going to go into all the details. We have an example that maybe it will rain. So let's try this. I don't even know where Katowice, I don't know how to pronounce that. Let's run it and see. All right, so it is going to rain. Good call. So now it's going to plan indoor activities instead. So you can see that it makes a decision, right? It like evaluates on something, but you're kind of controlling the decision making here. So again, it's much more prescriptive. You get to kind of decide, but it might be useful. We'll look at the code for this real quick. Let's see, not this one. We can probably close that and open this up. All right, so if we go into our weather or our workflows and our weather branch workflow, you can see we create a workflow called weather branch workflow. It takes a city, it outputs activities, and first it fetches the weather, and then it creates two branches, which says, here's a condition for the branch, here's what you should do, here's the condition for this branch, here's what you should do, and you could chain these together. But essentially you get the plan indoor activities or plan outdoor activity steps. And just like before, we define all the steps up above. So the first one fetches the weather. That's the same thing. It just goes out to those APIs. And of course, like if I was actually building this, I'd probably not rewrite all this code every time. I'd import it. We'd make it a little simpler. But for demonstration purposes, it's easy to see what's going on here. So plan activities. So this first one calls the planning agent, passes in the prompt, and there's plan indoor activities. So you kind of have the either, again, plan activities if it's plan indoor activities, if it's precipitation is if it's going to rain, otherwise just call plan activities. And all we're doing is making a call to our planning agent, which if we want to take a look at what the planning agent does, it just has a system prompt of what kind of plan it should make, and it passes in a prompt on how it actually does it. Yes, so Derek, you could take the context from the previous step, and you could actually have a step that decides between and then passes a string to conditions. And so your previous step could call an agent that then decides on which step to take. So that is certainly possible. If it's not more of a static step, you could certainly do that, where your previous step calls out to an agent to do some analysis, and then you give it options and say, you have three choices. You can take one of these three options. And then, it kind of goes down through the chain of events, so to speak. One more quick example that we'll show, and is just like a travel agent. And this one's just 3 steps, but the reason I wanted to show it is sometimes you might want human input. So maybe you do, in some cases, it's like you want it to ask, should I execute this trade for you or not? Yes or no, something like that, right? And so this one's just a travel agent. So I could say I want a beach vacation. I can run it. It's going to generate suggestions. So if I look, it's going to say Hawaii, Greece, Maldives. I'm going to go, let's go to Greece. Why not? So I'm going to make the selection. And then it continues and kind of picks up where it left off, right? So now once it had the input, it can then go on to the next step. And that input could, of course, go off in a branch as well if you wanted to like provide the ability to kind of switch between it. So definitely, a lot of tools that you can use to kind of figure out how you might want to put these different things together. Again, this one is much more deterministic. You could also do some of the same stuff in an agent and just provide a a more detailed system prompt. So let's take a look at this trading agent. And it looks like we still have like, maybe 20 minutes, and the last 10 minutes we'll save for questions. So we'll spend a little bit of time kind of going through what this does, and then definitely we can try out some different things if we want to try to write some code too. We might have a little time for that. So the instructions say your trading assistant provides information. You have access to some recall API tools. We'll show that code. And I did provide it just some access to like some just basic crypto API to show. So it has access to, I think, like CoinGecko or something, just to get not saying that that's the best API to use, but it's available. And so pretty easy to get an API key for that. And then I wrote a bunch of tools for recall as well. So you can get information about your recall agent, your portfolio, you can get your trades, you can get a trade quote, and you can execute the recall trade. Another thing that is interesting that I didn't showcase, you can actually provide a workflow to an agent. And where that might be interesting is if you want your agent to make a decision, but you want them to follow a very specific set of steps if they make that decision. So you can kind of wire these two things together, where you could see in the workflows that you called out to agents to like actually just make LLM calls, but your agent can actually execute entire workflows. So you can build a pretty complex map of kind of an agentic system here. We like to think of them as like Lego blocks. So a lot of different things you could do, but you kind of got to keep track of like how you want to wire these things together. And again, we kind of look through all this other stuff. So why don't we actually obviously I can just ask basic crypto questions. It's going to get the price. It goes out and got the price, some information about it. That's great. I did set up let me just pull this over. I did set up an agent on recall. So I have a Mastra bot agent, and I've wired up that API key. So let's say I haven't done anything with it besides just like setting it up. So yours will probably look a lot more detailed. Can you get me information about my agent profile? So it's going to call this. It's going to say agent ID. Here's the skills that I gave it when it was created, who owns it, all that kind of stuff, right? Let's also now say, what is my current balance for my agent? So it's going to get this. It's going to tell me what I have, and this is just kind of what you get out of the box. And let's see, what else can I do? Could ask it to make a trade for me, I guess. But before we do that, let's look at how all this is written and what it's all doing, right? So obviously I can get an agent that's making LLM calls, that's calling these different tools. Again, I can test any of these tools individually. So I can just get recall agent, and it calls that tool, gives me that information. So I can easily test tools. The general workflow that I recommend is if you're manually building tools yourself, you should definitely spend time testing the tools in isolation. Make sure that if you pass in this data, you get the right data back. That way, when your agent calls it, it's going to get the data that you expect. So it's like write the tool, test it, then come in, make sure your agent calls it in the right scenarios. And the way you do that is through, the right description. Anyone should be able to scan this list, and an average human should be able to make the right decisions based on circumstances, just reading the name and the description. So that's kind of a general rule of thumb. You want to make those descriptions pretty verbose. Otherwise, you start to run into issues. Another thing that more like an architectural thing, if you give your agent too many tools, it can, depending on the models you use, it'll break down at different points. but it can just start to suffer from like quality of decision making. It'll start making the wrong decisions or not calling the tool when you expect it to, and it's just kind of like information overload, right? If I give you a list of 3 tools that you could use and I tell you the scenario, you could probably make a decision more likely than if I gave you a list of 100 tools, because you know, again, there's only so much context that even the LLMs can manage. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes you'll want to have lighter weight, more specific agents that do different things, and you'll weave those together rather than trying to have one agent that has this huge collection of tools. Another thing that I didn't go through, but I'll just briefly touch on before we look at this code, is we also have this agent networks, which tries to wire agents up for you. You basically create the collection of agents, add it to a network, and you have like a supervisor or manager agent that will facilitate which agents get called in which scenarios. If you want to build kind of more complex research assistants, we've seen a lot of people like to explore agent networks for that. It's usually, if you know, it can be a little less deterministic. Your results could vary more wildly because you have like there's a lot of things that could go wrong in that process, but it can also be incredibly flexible because it can do some pretty deep research type tasks. So another thing that you could look at, and again, you already built the agents. The agent network is just kind of combining agents and workflows together into one network. All right, let's look at some code. So we'll take a look at the trading agent. So I provided some tools here. So we'll look at those tools, and then I provided some recall tools. Here's the system prompt that I put together. This is I would consider this to be a very simple system prompt. If you're building an agent and you want it to make some complex decisions, your system prompt might end up being, 10 times this, maybe, 5 times this, because you can kind of lay out different scenarios in different structures, and you have to be very verbose on how you write this so the agent can really understand. It's typically a good, you should put the most important information kind of at the top, but then you can also reiterate things towards the bottom as well, because it kind of reads it top down. I am using GPT-4o. Again, you can change that. I provided a list of tools. We'll show a little bit more about MCP here in a minute, but that's roughly how that works. If we look at the CoinGecko tools, we have one that just search crypto coin. It's just calling out to the coins list. I have my API key in my environment file, so I'm not going to show that, but of course you just get an API key and plug it in. And then we also have, so one's a search tool and one's like get a specific price by ID. And again, it's just calling out to that, doing a fetch call with, my API key and returning that data. It also allows me to get historical prices. So I guess we could try that and see how that works. Let's see. You can go ahead and get historical prices. So it looks kind of back over the last 30 days and gives me price history. But you can do, of course, different time periods if you want to wire it up a certain way. And again, pretty simple. It's kind of similar to the weather one, right? I'm just making an API call. All this tool does is like a wrapper around the APIs. If an API that you want to use has a JavaScript SDK, you could use that. You still have to create the tools, but you would basically just be wrapping calls to their SDK. So that's another option. If you don't want to make direct fetch calls, if they provide an SDK, you can use that as well. So there's a lot of it's not too difficult to wire up these tools. And honestly, I think these ones I probably wrote myself, but these recall tools, I did not write myself. Cursor wrote these, right? Because it used the Mastra MCP doc server. It knows what the structure is for create tool. It didn't get it right perfectly. I had to adjust a few parameters, but honestly, I don't even know that I've read this code that closely, but it seems like it works. But I imagine that's how you're all writing a lot of this stuff too, right? You let your coding agent take the first pass, then you test it, you iterate, and you fix things. So let's look at some of these tools here. So it's a helper function just to get the header, which is of course my API key. I'm using the sandbox API. So getting the get recall agent calls this agent profile. And all I did when I fed the context into cursor is, went to, these docs. I fed it this link, gave it the information, and it kind of did its research and used the Mastra MCP server and pulled it all together. I am curious if you are listening, what are you using to help you write your code? Are you using Cursor? Are you using Claude Code, Windsurf, Klein, somewhere in the middle? I'm a Cursor plus I do use Claude Code quite a bit. So I do a bit of both. I also use Claude Code sometimes in the CLI, depending on my mood. If I want to just like let a task run, I'll use a CLI. If I want to be more hands-on, I'll use either Cursor agent or Claude Code inside Cursor. All right, so let's look at these tools. But yeah, again, this one's going out and getting the profile. It's all the same format, right? I'm console logging some things here just because I was testing some stuff. Because Cursor's first attempt didn't work, I had to do a little tweaking. It's doing a fetch call, and it's returning it. So pretty simple, right? It's just literally changing the URL, fetch, if there is any input schema. But in this case, it's just using the API key to know which agent I'm referring to, and it can get the balances, it can get my portfolio, it can get my list of trades. And then I also spent some time on the trade docs, did the same thing. So you can actually have it execute a trade and have it get a quote. And again, it's just the same wrapped things. This was a little more complicated because it has an input schema, right? Some of these things need to be passed in, but then it'll execute it. It does some, get some search params that get added to the URL, and then it gets passed. And I think this might actually not work. If I look at this, I'm seeing some issues here because this is, no, it is a get. Okay. So yeah, get a quote, but execute should be a post. So did it make it a post? Let's see. Yeah, it did. Okay. So yeah, it might work. But you can see there's a little bit more complexity here. One more thing. So Carson, what I did is honestly, I just passed in the URL to Cursor and said, here's the docs, and here is the, use the Mastra MCP. But there's if you can get to the Swagger endpoint, it would probably be better because it's a little more consistent. So I saw that at one point. There's a Swagger endpoint for this somewhere. And if you could pass it that, I think it'd probably do a little bit better. So yeah, that all works. So I will say there's also an MCP, which I saw. I didn't actually see this. So candidly, I didn't know it existed until 20 minutes before this call. So I did set it up. So I followed the instructions here, the competition's MCP. And, I cloned it. I had it running locally. I built it. I did run into a small build error, but it still worked. And then it gives me the available tools. There is a slight problem with how it works, so I will kind of show you. I'm sure I can find a very quick solution. I just kind of found out about it and I was like, well, we should try this MCP just because. So let me see if I can. We have about 5 minutes and then we'll save 10 minutes for questions. So let me see. All right, so I have that installed there. I don't need this one anymore. Just trying to clean this up a little bit. I have the playground running, so I'm going to close this out and I'm going to then re-enable this, and we'll do a little live. Maybe you all can help me out. All right, so I have this MCP here. I've installed it locally and built it. So I instantiate MCP client. I'm passing in my recall API key. I'm passing in the sandbox URL. I don't actually have that, but so maybe that part wouldn't work. I don't think I actually added that environment variable yet. And then the log info. That's all I needed to do to connect to that MCP once I had it built and running locally. Now, if I go to my agent, there's one more thing I forgot to mention that I will mention here in just a second. I'm going to get rid of these tools and uncomment this. All right, so I'm importing the MCP client. I could just drop that code in here, of course, but just for cleanliness, I'm putting its own file. And then I'm getting the list of MCP tools. And then I'm just giving my agent all the tools. You might want to be more selective, so you can actually get a tool set and be more selective, get an object of tools to pass in. Maybe I'll try that here in just a second, because I think this doesn't quite work. But I'll show you what this does if we were to run it. All right, so we go here. Let's open this back up. Not this one, too many tabs. And if I go back to my trading agent, you see now I have a bunch of tools. Get API agent profile, put API agent profile, all the MCP tools. You notice there's this like R underscore. That is because whatever you name your MCP, this should probably say like recall, right? I'll show you why I did that here in just a second. But if you see there and I go back and I refresh, it's just the name of the tools. So it kind of adds a little extra information. So the one challenge that this currently runs into is the MCP server has a very long names. So if I say, can you tell me information about my agent? Some of these tools have really long names now, and so they don't actually work. But I think we can actually fix this. If I find which tool I want, get API agent profile. See if this actually works. Response validation failed. Okay, well, we will try quickly here to see that we can get this working. And if I can't, I will update. I will push this repo to Git. So then once I get it working, you should be able to hopefully use it as well. So if I go into my trading agent, let's see, recall. I think I might have to access it like this, maybe. I don't know if that's going to work. Probably not. So there should be a way to get an individual tool here, but it's an object. We'll see. We'll spend 2 minutes doing some live debugging, and we'll see what we can get. All right, so adding tools, using MCP tools. We need we need to configure the MCP static versus dynamic. So we want to probably use dynamic configuration here. So we get tool sets. Let's see how this works. You can pass in the tool set to the agent directly. All right, let's try one more thing. Get tools. It's not gonna work. Cannot find name profile. I need to. I have to just change the name of this because dashes don't quite work. We're almost out of time. I do want to have some time for questions. So essentially what I would do is I could individually call the tools that don't have too long of names. You can actually then I could rename them. Maybe my feedback for the recall MCP is figure out if we can make the names slightly shorter. So if you do need to append anything on it, it'll still fit under the validation. But it's just a implementation detail at this point. I could probably ask Claude Code to make a run at this and fix this issue. But overall, once that's working, now I get access to a whole bunch of tools. There's also other places you can go, and I mentioned MCP registries. Smithery is a really good one. There's some crypto and Web3 tools in there. There's a bunch of tools if you want to do research, all kinds of things. So some really cool tools that you can give access to. And again, you just configure it. I could add a whole bunch of different servers on here. Here's the recall one. I could add more, decide which ones to pass into my agent, and then let my agent go. One more small note. It's typically good practice to not only give it the tools here, but also in your system prompt, tell it when it should call certain tools. So if you do have questions, please drop in the chat and I will try to answer them. Hopefully you all got some value out of this. I will share these slides and just as, some examples, I need to update this GitHub. So I'll actually update this. If we can share these slides after, I'll make it public. And that way you can all see these slides. Maybe I'll just drop it in the chat. But I will update and make sure that this project GitHub gets updated once I push this example up. And that way you can see, kind of where it ends up and have a good starting spot. So how do you think about the spectrum from give agent context and tools versus make deterministic workflows that have tightly scoped LLM steps? That's a really tough question because I don't think there's one right answer. If you do know all the steps you want it to take, and you could write those steps down and say, I want it to do this, and then maybe make a decision and then do one of these few things. If you can do something like that, I would just recommend making it a workflow because you know with certainty it's going to follow that path. I like to think of, the example that I've used many times that I think helps at least me wrap my head around how I would decide is I think of the agent, like if I was hiring someone to work in like a customer support or customer success type role, maybe like a support engineer to help people, because I've worked with a lot of those in my past, like, right? So if I hired that person in, I would give them a set of tools that might be like Slack or Discord or email, maybe Zendesk for like ticketing. I'd give them a bunch of different tools. I would also then give them instructions like, here's how you should think about this. That's like your system prompt. The agent is the person I just hired. But my team would probably have put together like playbooks. Like, here's a playbook of steps. Like, if this scenario happens, do these things, follow these steps. Maybe you have to make some decisions along the way. But overall, like, here's the process, follow the process. And those would be workflows. So when I think about it like that, it kind of helps me decide like, okay, the agent is, the decision maker, but you have maybe some playbooks or workflows that you give the agent, you give them a set of tools. And so that's like my starting point. But I would say your mileage is going to vary depending on the complexity. So you're going to probably have to experiment with both and see what's giving you the best results. And yeah, for those of you who haven't already, please give us a Mastra star on GitHub. if you want to try out Mastra Cloud, if you did want to deploy this thing, this agent in production, if you didn't want to go beyond just running it locally, you could do that. Yeah, then follow me on X if you're so inclined. And yeah.
Thank you very much, Shane. Really good, and really nice to see the hands-on workshops, especially in these early stages of the hackathons where people are just getting started. I think that's like one of the most helpful ways to introduce people to tech. So that's really good. Yeah, so Shane is in the Discord, as are members of the Recall team and myself. So if you've got any questions about this workshop that you're thinking about that sort of haven't quite formulated, please feel free to ask in the Encode Discord. There will be recordings of these workshops, and they will be available tomorrow through the Hacker Pack. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and I think we'll end the workshop there. Thanks, Shane.
Yeah, good to see you all. Thank you.
Bye.